but it seems, I mean, there was some talk about what is this? This isn't art. It's something else. It's sort of an illustration. It's informed by the arts in the sense we're all immersed in this discussion about artistic expression. It's informed by science. We've talked about, I mean, Conrad is someone coming from the arts who's drawing on elements of science. I'm somebody coming from the sciences that's sort of dabbling in art a little bit. And so we're in this strange in-between world. It's not really clear what it is.
And you several times talked about this process of this week bringing up this possibility of there being some other discipline.
Yeah, some new thing which is neither, something which hasn't even got a name yet, whereby, I mean, this process of integration it's an important theme that came up during the week. Robin and I in particular were talking a lot about this, which is there's a gap opening up. I mean, there was a time when the most advanced scientific ideas known to humanity were more or less accessible to everyone because they were fairly simple. And then they got more and more specialised, but there was still, apparently, in the time of Leibniz, in the, what was that, the 18th century or 17th? 17th, yeah, Leibniz was supposedly the last human being to actually have a complete picture of everything that was known in the sciences. And after that, there was too much, there's just been too much of it. So even in one area, no one mathematician has a grasp of the whole of mathematics, no one biologist has the grasp of the whole of biology. You can only see a tiny little picture of it. And most ordinary people are, separated by this vast chasm from this incredibly specialised scientific work that's going on, because in order to understand the results, you need to study for years and years just to be able to understand the language and the symbolism, or the symbols. And so something's wrong here. I mean, I suppose that's an ethical statement, but it doesn't seem right that the world is being driven by the mathematical sciences to such an extent that everyone's being left behind. People are carrying these gadgets around with them which, this thing exploits quantum tunneling, but I mean, how many people could actually explain what quantum tunneling is? So this chasm that's opening up between people's experience of the world and the way that the sort of inner sanctum of the priesthood who sort of decide how it works are seeing it, doesn't seem like a healthy state of affairs. So it's almost a form of activism to say, well, maybe we can bridge that gap. Well, I suppose I would see it as a kind of trying to close up a wound. That's my personal stance. Robin doesn't see it like that. He sees it more as an exciting possible synthesis. What would it be like if you could suddenly download the totality of quantum physics, relativity theory, nanotechnology, microbiology, all that knowledge, if it could just become some sort of downloadable package that you could just everyone could have it? How would we suddenly, if everyone was walking around with all of that knowledge, all of the sciences in their head, how would they relate to the world? That's a really interesting.
In that way, we thought about what we were trying to do this week could be seen as an index, or the problems which we were engaged with could be seen as an index of this much wider social chasm that Matthew described, and this is something which really has driven the evolution of, not really the evolution, but has driven the way in which the volumes of collapse developed in volume 4, which was called concept horror. A great deal of that notion came from thinking about the way in which we abstractly know things about science, and we abstractly can accept philosophical statements, and yet we don't really integrate them into our experience of life. And the question was, well, if you can actually absorb what quantum physics is telling you, what kind of experience would you have of the world? And the suggestion there was, well, the people who have given the best speculative portrait of what the world would look like if you could actually absorb these incredible theories are people who have written weird fiction and horror fiction. And so there's this role for artists in precisely dramatising. And then that led to the fifth volume, in which Conrad and I had this piece, which was called the Copernican Imperative. And this was the opposite idea, in a sense, that there are theories and structures which science reveals to us, which we can't possibly ignore, and we have to simply accept that. We have to accept that there's no reconciliation between our intuitive way of being in the world and what science tells us about reality. So there's those two kind of polarised positions. But I'd like to ask Conrad whether, I guess the key question from this week is whether you see that kind of reconciliation between abstract theories of science and our everyday experience or our sensory experience. Or another way we put it is this process of bringing these very systematic and embedded systems back into natural language. Whether you see that as part of your task as an artist, or whether that's something that you don't feel is really your responsibility.
I think so, at certain points I've sort of thought that, I mean, one of the things that I've slightly kind of been not disheartened, but sort of talking to Matthew more about it, as one question we came up with was this whole thing about space and time, and the space-time continuum, and I had this, which Matthew's been quite clear about saying that I had a very misguided idea about what that was. And that my idea of it came from reading a lot of popular science and a lot of things. I mean, Matthew hasn't been a little bit discouraging in the sense that he said that all these are all metaphors, and the only way to really understand it is to understand the mathematics behind it, to read that mathematics. So it's not that some of them. Anyway, I've been in the past. I've sort of read things like Einstein has said, or just through popular science, some of the quotes, and one of the things was this idea that I had gleaned from various things that the faster you travel through time, the slower you travel through space, and they were equal. There was this sort of space-time continuum constant that basically as you approach the speed of light, this time slows down until a photon just isn't moving through time. And this was the sort of thing I grasped to glean from this, and that I had this quite nice sort of poetic idea that this was quite a good metaphor for life, and that the energy in our bodies we're resisting this sort of this travelling at the speed of light through time, and we want to. Our life source keeps us for a brief time, only 70 years, for this instant of time, alive, and then the minute we die, we sort of then, like everything else, are travelling at the speed of light through time. So it was this resistance. So anyway, it was completely this element. The second element to this was kind of quite romantic, but the first bit was the thing that I gleaned from popular science, this interchangeability of time and space. But essentially, Matthews sort of said that this is entirely mistaken, and that I've been living.
Let's not get into that discussion right now.
This is essentially first the whole
This illustrates part of the problem in that popular science tries to make very difficult ideas accessible. It's part of the problem I'm grappling with in writing a book which sort of falls into that category, even though my motives are different. And things have to be simplified. If you could explain relativity theory in very simple language to anyone, then you wouldn't bother with Einsteinian tensor mechanics and Riemannian geometry to do it. And people aren't trying to be purposefully complicated. You need to do that in order to really make it clear. So if you want to draw it down into something people can talk about, you have to use metaphor and visualizations, and you have to sort of bend the truth a little bit. And the problem is people can then read that and go away thinking they've understood something, and in fact they've taken something from it, but to call it understanding is perhaps
I think glean is a good word.
Glean. So I mean, the thing is, because Conrad's an artist, it's not really a problem. You can glean sources of inspiration and turn these into artworks which aren't attempting to be scientific models. But I want to just, I mean, is it right to ask Conrad? I mean, there's one piece by Conrad which I'm particularly enthusiastic about. It's called Loop System Quintet, and it illustrates very beautifully a set of musical ratios in terms of a set of 5 interlinked kinetic sculptures. Each one's got a rotating arm with another arm rotating at the end of it, and they're geared in certain ratios with a light at the end, so the light's travelling along a seemingly very chaotic path. But if you take time-lapse photographs, you see these very beautiful, what are called torus knots, these sort of woven patterns. Now I'm very familiar with that in terms of both music theory, because I've played music in the past, and mathematics. But to me that's a very successful dramatisation of a scientific idea. But where does that differ from a simple model? What's the element? There's no failure in that. I mean, you talk about failure a lot.